to me. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce you to Laura Patsko. I'm sure you already know her because she delivered some of the most successful webinars that we hosted in these times. So welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for being here with us today. So Laura is a language and learning consultant, and she's talking to us today about how to make online classes active and interactive. And if you want to speak to her and reach out to her, you can find their Twitter handles right there at the bottom of the screen, Laura Haha and Blackbird LXD. So welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Over to you.
Thank you, Federica. Thanks so much for that wonderful introduction. Um, let's just check quickly before we go any further. Very important. Can you all see me and can you all hear me? Please type yes, yes in the chat box together. Yes, yes, if you can both see and hear me. Excellent. Good. That makes me feel good so far. Some of you may be returning from the earlier webinar today where we had some technical difficulties. So I'm very happy that we're beginning on this positive note. I'd like to say thank you, first of all, to those people who were very patient in the earlier webinar, and eventually we covered a few ideas, but I know that some of you may be returning from that session to this session to try and catch the ideas that you missed. So thank you so much for being patient and for trying again with us. I'd also like to thank all of you for attending now. We're all extremely busy at the moment. I completely sympathized with Federica just now, trying to remember what day it is. I feel like I wake up in the morning and I think, where am I? Who am I? What am I doing today? So thank you so much for giving up your time to spend an hour with us talking about teaching. And I'd also like to say a very important thank you to Mike and to Federica from Macmillan. After these events are finished, it's my name next to the video. I kind of get all the glory, but a lot of the hard work is done by the people behind the scenes, the people who introduce me to you, like Federica and to Mike. So big thank you to them for all the hard work they do to make this webinar possible. Now, I'm very fortunate to have Macmillan staff providing technical support in this webinar. But in your online lessons, you may not be so lucky. So this first slide that you can see now with this little cat and dog, you're going to see this a few times through the webinar, just as a way of demonstrating something that I think could be helpful in your teaching, that it's important at regular moments to check that your students can still see and hear you okay. So whenever we see this during the webinar, I'd like you to do what you just did and type yes, yes in answer to the questions in the chat box. So what are we going to do in this webinar? Well, first we'll talk about what are we doing right now? And then the bulk of the webinar will be answering this question. How can we make our online lessons more active and interactive, and why? In the other order, excuse me, why should we make them more active and interactive, and how can we do that? So we'll do some practical activities together. I hope you are ready to move a little bit and get out of your seats. I'm going to ask you to. I understand the feeling sometimes in a teacher training workshop to not want to participate. It doesn't feel necessary. You understand the idea. But this webinar is really about the value of getting active. And I think the best way to understand that is to do the same things we're asking our students to do. That's the best way for us to really understand what we're expecting of them. So please do participate if you are able to. And if you're not, of course, that's fine too. So at the end of the webinar, I hope we'll have some time to share some ideas as well from your experience and to ask any burning questions that you might have. Now, if we have any technical difficulties and I disappear, it does happen, but please don't worry, don't panic. Just get up, walk around, stretch your legs for 1 or 2 minutes, and then come back to the screen. And if I'm still not here when you come back, because I'm restarting my computer or something, then Federica or Mike have agreed to take over temporarily. They know the content of my webinar and they can help make sure that you still make the most of your time. So just in case it happens, please don't worry, we will survive. Okay, so without further ado, what exactly are we doing today? Well, very important newsflash. This is not online teaching. We are not doing online teaching in the way that it is generally meant. Under better circumstances, we have all the time we need, the resources we need, the time we need for developing online teaching and online content. However, at the moment, I argue that that's not what we're doing. And maybe you're thinking, well, what are we doing then if we're not doing online teaching? I would say what we're doing is emergency remote teaching. This is not my phrase. This is a phrase I discovered this week in an article that was shared with me by James Taylor. Thank you, James, for sharing that. And in emergency remote teaching, our main objective is not to recreate this robust educational system. It's not to do everything exactly how we've always done it in all the ways that we know work, because we've had decades to develop those ways. We haven't had decades to prepare ourselves for the current situation. If you were already teaching online, maybe you feel quite prepared. But for the vast majority of teachers around the world, this is emergency teaching and it's remote teaching. And so our main objective is to provide temporary access to instruction and instructional supports. And that needs to be quick and it needs to be reliably available. And that's why I say we're not doing online teaching. I'm a little bit worried that after after this is over, of course, we don't really know what that's going to look like. But I do worry that in a few weeks or a few months, people will make judgments about the nature and the quality of teaching online based on the current circumstances. But the current circumstances are not ideal. And under ideal circumstances, online teaching can be excellent. Even under these circumstances, of course, online teaching can be excellent, but we need to be careful not to judge them by the same criteria, because at the moment we're dealing with an emergency situation and we're doing the best that we can. Excuse me. Another expression that I discovered recently, which I thought summarized well what we're doing, is we're kind of flying the plane while building it. At the moment, we're doing the best that we can with all of the knowledge and the skills that we already have, and then some new knowledge and skills that we're learning very quickly. And I'm seeing this a lot in social media at the moment, and I think you are too, that a lot of people are very grateful for the effort that we're making. And sometimes I think we can forget that because we're a little bit isolated behind our webcams, behind our computers. But I know that a lot of people out there are very grateful for the effort that teachers are making. And I think we should acknowledge that we're doing a really difficult job under difficult circumstances, but it won't always be this way. So for now, we do the best that we can, and we continue to use the knowledge and the skills that we genuinely have. You know, it's not all new. We're actually very capable already. So don't forget that in the more stressful moments. Having said all that, of course, there are some new challenges, some new fears. I'll give you a moment just to read these examples. So there are a number of challenges and fears that I think a lot of us are facing at the moment. And they're not all about technology and about teaching. Some of it is very personal, but we're still expected to turn up to work and be professional and do a good job. So really, it's the one on the left here about teaching, challenges with teaching, that we're going to focus on today. It's easy to laugh at this story of a mother who found their child supposedly learning online, but they really posted a picture in front of the camera that made it look like they were engaged. And I know for a lot of teachers, that's their worst nightmare. They think, well, how can I tell? How do I know if they're engaged? So this is what we're going to do in this webinar. We're going to look at some practical examples of using interaction, using action, physical activity, to keep that engagement and that motivation. And I want you to think for a moment about why you're here attending this webinar. I'd suggest there are two possible reasons. Some of you will be here for wisdom. Some of you will be here for Wictum. I remember hearing this once in a conference, and I always remembered it, and I'm afraid I've forgotten who said it, but I thought this was great. Sometimes we just need, what can I do? Give me a practical idea. What can I teach on Monday? So hopefully we'll have a little bit of the first one. We'll definitely have some of the second one. We'll have lots of practical activities in this webinar. Now, before we get to that, let's just briefly summarize why this even matters. And I'd like you to do a survey. This survey will appear on your screen in just a moment, so you can choose. I want you to think and calculate, by the end of today, how much time will you have spent sitting and looking at a screen? And I want you to think not just about your laptop, but any screen, a computer, a television, a mobile, a tablet. So let's put the poll up on your screen now. You should see it appear in just a moment. And you should be able to cast your vote. There are options underneath, so make sure you scroll down to see the options. You can choose just one. So less than 2 hours, 2 to 4 hours, 5 to 7 hours, 8 to 10 hours, or more than 10 hours, just today. So not all week, just today. And by the end of the day, the total time you think you will spend in front of a screen. I can see that about half of you have voted so far. So please use the survey that's on your screen if possible. If you type it into the chat box, I can see the answer, but it's harder to see the balance of answers across all the attendees. 5.7 hours, that is very precise. If you're not able to scroll down, then fine, type in the chat box. But I can see that well, yes, actually still just over half of you have selected your options. So do try to scroll down. The poll is part of the Click Meeting webinar software, but there are other websites that you can use for polls and surveys, and we're going to use one later together, so you'll see another alternative. Okay, I can tell you that of 1,500 attendees, only 1% of you have said less than 2 hours. And 6% of you have said 2 to 4 hours. So 7% of all of you who have voted are really spending, let's say, not too much time in front of a screen. And the rest of you, it's all 5 hours and above. And that's quite a lot of time spent staring at a screen. Thank you for voting. I've ended the survey now, and I'll just show you the results. So you can see that just over half of you voted, and those colored in red were quite a high number of hours in front of a screen. Now, why does this matter? Well, before I tell you, I'd like you to stand up. I'll go with you and just stretch for 20 seconds. I'll count with you. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, really good stretch, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Thank you. Now you've got a little bit more of a bit more oxygen. I can see some of you saying, I can feel my blood circulating all over my body. Excellent. That's what we are trying to achieve. I asked you, why does this matter? Well, bear in mind, of course, that some learners probably won't be interested in standing up and stretching if they don't see any reason for it, by which I mean any reason connected to their language learning. So if you think they need it and will actually do it, include it. And if not, you can integrate some physical activity into your classroom activities themselves. And these are the examples we're going to do together. And this matters for a number of reasons when you're teaching online, not only online, but particularly online, is of course sitting for long periods is really quite tiring. It also can lead to very poor posture. I know sometimes I find myself sitting like this after maybe 10 minutes. And when I sit up straight, I realize how much pain I've been in. Looking at the screen for long periods can really hurt your eyes. And getting your blood flowing gets the oxygen going around your body. It goes to your brain. You have more energy. You're more able to concentrate. Now, I'm not a physician. This is not medical advice, but I think a lot of us from our teaching experience know that some people really have difficulty sitting still anyway. We know this from our ordinary teaching. Now, when we're teaching online, maybe we can't see them all so well, but it doesn't change. I'm speaking as one of those students who could never sit still. I can tell you it's a lot harder now that a lot of my work is kind of attached to my desk. And of course, in terms of language, the 3D environment around you, the physical environment, is where the meaning lives, the things that you interact with, the people that you interact with every day. So including some physical activity in your classes where the students have to move around the environment and engage with it, like they do in some of the activities we're going to use, that's really going to help their language development because it makes the use of language more concrete, more meaningful. And the last point that I'll make is about accessibility and inclusion. It's really important to consider the physical space to make sure that we remove some of the barriers to learning that exist for some pupils. There's a concept which some of you may have heard of called universal design for learning. I've included a link on the slide and you'll receive a copy of the slides after the webinar if you want to read more. But one of the principles included in this concept of universal design is physical action. Now, these principles exist anyway. They were not designed for online learning. They were designed for inclusive learning. And it's really important to have physical action as a part of your instruction. Why is it so important? Well, because, as they say, learners differ widely in their capacity to navigate their physical environment. So some learners may have more difficulty engaging with the physical environment. We also have to be mindful of that. But as far as possible, if we can provide alternatives for our students so that they can respond in ways that are comfortable for them, and particularly that we consider physically how they respond, do they need to type, do they need to write, and so on, that's going to open up opportunities for more learners. And that's something we should always be thinking about. Now, as I say, after the webinar, you will receive a copy of these slides. So I'd recommend that you go and read more about that in your own time. The rest of this webinar, we're going to keep quite practical, and this is a bit more research-based and theoretical. So we won't look at it in any more detail now. Now, so much for making our lessons active. In terms of making them interactive, there are some challenges when teaching online, particularly in a communicative approach. We often take for granted a lot of the small interactions that happen throughout our teaching, like checking that our students have understood concepts or instructions, setting up tasks, simply conducting the tasks, pair work and group work, monitoring. We're able, through our interaction, either our interaction with the students or their interaction together, we're able to monitor the level of energy, the level of engagement. That's a little bit harder to do online, not impossible, but it means that a lot of the things that we were never formally trained for, but we developed intuitively, we now have to think about in a more conscious way. You know, how do I know they're paying attention? How do I know they're engaged? How do I know they understood? We need to make some of these processes much more explicit. So we're going to do several activities which demonstrate some of these things. I hope you're ready. Now, the first thing I will say is when we do our activities in this webinar, I want to draw your attention to how I set them up. Remember that I can't see any of you, I can't hear any of you, and there are a lot of you for me to organize. Currently, we are at maximum webinar capacity. There are 1,500 people here. There's no space in the room for any more. So clear task setup is absolutely critical. Of course, this is the same for your classes, which I hope do not have over 1,000 students. So you can maybe check their understanding of instructions a little bit more easily, for example. This time, the burden is on me to be as clear as possible. So let's begin. Now, my first top tip for you is, in this order: explain, demonstrate, and check. And only after that are your students ready to do the activity. So you need to give your instructions verbally, and also ideally display them on the screen. There are lots of reasons for this. Sometimes it's a question of accessibility. A student who maybe has hearing difficulties would also need visual support. Sometimes it's a technical problem. So the student might be able to hear you if they temporarily cannot see the slides. So as far as possible, try to give your instructions verbally and visually. Again, if possible, demonstrate the activity together. That's going to make sure that when they start, they have a better idea of how to continue, so you don't waste the activity time re-explaining everything. And then you check they've understood. Now, this is the one step I'm not really going to be able to do with you today, because I cannot adequately ask one out of over 1,000 of you to switch on your webcam and answer a question. So I'll trust you. And then you'll be ready to do the activity. So the first activity we're going to look at is a communicative classic. But we're going to look at an adaptation. So instead of a find someone who, we're going to do a find something which. Now, in a typical find someone who, like this one, you could be doing free spoken communication, or you could be practicing some language. In this case, you can see that this example is designed to practice the present perfect simple and the present perfect continuous. Now, in a physical classroom, we might conduct this activity in a very mobile way. So we'd ask our students to move around the classroom, talk to different people, find someone who has been to London, for example, write down their name and ask another question. In the find something which, we're going to do it a little bit differently, because they can't really mingle online, as some of you are noticing in the chat box. But that doesn't mean that we can't use this activity format. So in this particular activity, the students have to get out of their seats, because they're going to need to bring something to the webcam and show you, and then the communication and the conversation begins. So the activities kind of divided in two. There's the preparation, and then there's the communication. Now I've explained the activity, so it's time to do a demo. The first item on our list is to find something which you've never liked, but you keep it in your house anyway. As a demo, I've brought something I prepared earlier. This is my example. It's one of those little snow globe things. I got this from a very elderly relative when I was very young. And to be honest, at the time, I didn't really like it. I didn't understand why it was interesting. I was a small child. But this relative then passed away, and now it's the only thing I have that she gave me. So even though I don't really like it, it stays in my house. Now, on the basis of this mini story, we could continue the conversation. You could ask me questions about the relative. We could talk about why we keep things, and so on and so forth. That's just a demonstration. Now it's your turn to do the activity, and I'll give you the rest of the activity now. And remember, I would like you, if possible, to really do this. I won't ask you to find all the items on the list, but try to find 2. Bring them back to your computer just like you would if you were a student and you were going to show them on the webcam and then continue the conversation. I know you can probably do this in your mind, but it helps to feel like your students feel. And I will also ask you, while you do this, to unplug your headphones if you're using them, because you need to be able to hear me when you're not sitting at the desk, because I'm going to tell you when to stop. During the activity, I will play some music, so you know that the sound is still working. I'm still here, but I won't be talking. Okay. Now is the point when I would normally check my instructions with my students. So I would ask them things like, how many items in the list do you need to find? They would tell me only 2 items. I would say, can you keep your earplugs your earphones plugged in? They would say, no, we need to unplug them. Why? We need to hear you when you say stop, etc. So let's go to the next slide, and it's your turn, and I will give you 2 minutes to find 2 things on the list and bring them back to your computer. Your turn. Here are the instructions, and go, and I will play some music while you are doing this. I would play some music, but the music doesn't seem to be working. That's interesting. So instead, I will just time you for 2 minutes. Okay, the instructions are on the slide. So is the list. Please go and find 2 things. And bring them back to your computer screen. Okay, music doesn't seem to be working very well. It's working now. Excellent. Okay, you've got about just under a minute left. Please bring your things back to the computer screen. Okay, remember to bring your things back. You're going to show them on the webcam, or you would show them on the webcam if you were a student. Okay, and your 2 minutes is up. So please stop there, come back to your desk, sit down. Again, if you were my class and there were only 10 or 20 or 30 of you, I would be talking now, giving you some time, saying stop, come back, sit down, get ready to share your objects, etc., etc. Now, there are 1,500 of you, so I'm afraid I can't invite you to switch on your webcam and share some things that you found. But in principle, this is what we would do now. So I would ask you to come back, switch on your webcam, share a couple things. We could either do this as a whole class, or I could put you into separate rooms to have your discussion together. I can see that some of you are sharing in the chat box these things. A mug, which I've got from my daughter, a packet of sponge cookies, a pair of pink shorts. Now, what's interesting here is that you have not all said which of the items on the list this relates to. So, for example, some of you may say, a mug I got from my daughter. Now, is this something you've never liked, but you keep in your house anyway? Is it something you've broken and fixed, etc.? So there's plenty of generative content here for the students to speak extensively afterwards. And this is a good point to remind you that after an activity like this, we need to check with our students. Can you see me? Can you hear me? And just as you're doing now, they will understand this routine and say, yes, yes. So by developing some online routines like this, we can make sure that our lessons continue smoothly and we don't proceed before our students are ready to. Now, you're sharing your ideas already. As I say, with the students, I would now either do something with the whole class if it's a small class, or maybe put them in breakout rooms to continue their discussion together, just like we would do for a Find Someone Who, but this time most of the discussion happens after they have found these things. And another tip, you could start each lesson this way with a very quick, a kind of mini Find Something Which. So you could do it yourself, give them a task, or you could nominate a different student at the start of every class to suggest something. And then you as the teacher can also join in. So for example, you might say, okay, Miriam, today's lesson is about food. What shall we go and find? And Miriam thinks about it and she says, your favorite snack. And everybody goes and finds something and brings it back. And then you talk about that. And that is immediately more relevant and more personal for the rest of their lesson. And it gets them straight into the topic, and the suggestion came from them. So this is just one way that you could use this activity. Now, the next activity I'm going to show you, we're not going to demonstrate together. This is one that we won't demonstrate because I'm not able to switch on your webcams. But it's a nice one to try if you're able to. It works with different ages and different levels. And this is simply miming or narrating. So if you have lower levels, you can start with something like, what's the weather like? Or what can you see from your window? What furniture is in your room? Anything that they can demonstrate physically, and probably with some humor. This will get the students thinking about the vocabulary. It's a nice kind of warm-up, and even with low levels, they can manage this, assuming, of course, that you're teaching in a context where they can put their webcams on. So, of course, miming wouldn't work well if you can't see what they're doing. Narrating could possibly work if you use video and ask the students to speak alongside the video and describe what they see, but then that's less interactive and it's less active. So this is a really nice example for webcams. One of you says in the chat box, all I can see out of the window is coronavirus. Good luck with miming that. I would be quite amused to see you try to mime that physically. Now, of course, with higher levels, you can do different things linguistically. So you could, for example, invite them to cook. Particularly with adults, this is a nice one. I know that I've done lessons in a physical classroom with adults where we cook things together, or they cook things at home and bring them in. And of course, you can change the level of challenge linguistically here by either doing the activity accurately or doing it creatively. So if you do the activity accurately, you might have one student cooking a dish, demonstrating, and the other students asking questions. A little bit like watching a cooking program on television, but in this case, you can interact with the presenter. Or you could also do it creatively. So one student cooks and demonstrates, but they don't tell you how to make the dish. Another student provides the commentary, provides the soundtrack. And this can be quite funny, seeing what the students believe is happening in the other student's kitchen. Again, much more engaging, and a little bit of physical activity, particularly for the student who is in their kitchen, moving around, doing things. With higher levels, another thing that you can do, offline or online, indeed, but it often requires more physical space, is a kind of role play or improv with miming, something based around a problem, something where gesturing, indicating physically, pointing, moving in the space is really important in order to explain and overcome the problem. So again, this is something that I would do in a physical classroom with students, and we would do it standing up. It involves a bit of drama, a bit of acting. If you have a webcam, you can also do this activity. And I'll show you some examples of the kinds of problems that I'm referring to. So you give your students a scenario like these. I'll give you a moment to read the slide. Now you can see how these problems involve a lot of communication, as resolving a problem always does, but they also involve something physical, some aspect of pointing, directing, getting upset, etc. So there's a lot of opportunity here for humor and just for a little bit of acting and drama for the students who like that kind of activity. Not everybody will love that kind of activity, but some of them will. And at higher levels, there's loads of language that can be worked on here, particularly functional language, language like apologizing, explaining, clarifying, and so on. Excuse me. Another top tip for this activity, You can invite students to keep a notepad on their desk, and then between lessons, they write down examples of real things that happened during their week. Or they can maybe take photos of these things instead of notes. And then those students' examples can become activities for later lessons. Now, I love this idea because lesson planning always takes a lot of time, but particularly at the moment with a lot of us teaching online, it's taking even more time to generate ideas and content. And where the students can bring their own ideas, really that helps us in two ways. It makes the content much more personal and relevant to them, and they generate the activities for the lesson. They bring the ideas. And so that saves us a little bit of planning time. If I show you a personal example, this is something that happened to me, I think about 2 weeks ago now, and I took a photo. So I was on a walk, my daily exercise, which the government allows, and I discovered this. These are my hands. I had to pull my sleeves over my hands to hold this little thing. Now, immediately, I can almost feel through the internet people thinking, oh, what happened? Was it injured? What did you do? How old was it? Etc., etc. Now, if your students bring the pictures or the notes, they bring the problem scenario, then there's your activity. And if it involves anything like this, holding, walking, being surprised, etc., then there's something physical, there's something active. The interactivity happens easily because there's genuine interest. The activity happens depending on how you conduct this exercise. If you want your students to mime or to act or to role play the scenario. So in this case, for example, I will tell you that I took this duckling to a bird sanctuary that was open. And so I could role play that dialogue maybe with another student through the camera. And we could do a kind of drama activity. Okay, it's time for you to do another activity now and for me to stop talking. So this is the activity that we're going to do together. It's called labeling and remembering. That's very important. I'd like you to prepare 5 small pieces of paper or sticky notes, if you have them, are even better. You're going to check that your pen or your pencil works. And remember that you are playing the students, I'm playing the teacher. So I will tell you a word to write. And your task is to find something in the room. So you don't need to leave, you don't need to go all the way around the house, but find something in the room which matches this description and label it. Now, in this case, you don't have to bring it back to the webcam. You just find the thing, and when you've heard the word, you write it down and you label it. Now, in some variations on this activity, I give the words quite quickly, so it's really a challenging task to respond quickly. In this case, I'll give you a little bit more time. So get your pens and papers ready, push your chair back, get ready to stand up and move around the room. Remember, again, unplug your headphones if you're using them, because you need to be able to hear my voice while you are moving around the room, without running back and listening and then running around again. So please unplug your headphones. And if you're ready, we will do a quick demo. First, remember, explain, then demonstrate, then check. Here is our demo. If I told you the word painful, you might run and think, oh my gosh, what in this room do I associate with that word? Now, my example, which I prepared earlier, is here. This is a yoga mat. I'm sure you can understand why I put the word painful on it. I was attending an online yoga class the other day, which was quite painful, quite hard work. So now I'm going to give you 4 more words. Get ready. Pen, paper. Your first word is creative. Creative. Find something in the room, label it with the word creative. Creative. I can see some of you are trying to label your cat, presumably with the word painful. Yes, you may stick it to yourself. Anything creative. Your next word is most incredible. Most incredible. So again, find something in the room or someone if they're willing. Most incredible, and label it. Oh, thank you to the person who's labeling this webinar. Lots of people labeling their family. Very sweet. I don't know how your family members feel about that. The next one is most interesting. Again, look around the room, find something, and stick this label to it. Most interesting. And finally, amused. Amused. Now, what in the room do you associate with this word? Amused. Okay, and stop. Come back to your screen, please. Stop, come back and sit down. Do not bring the labels. Do not bring the objects. Just bring yourself. Come back to your screen, plug in your headphones, and let's just check very briefly. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Can you see me? Can you hear me? Excellent. Okay, lots of you are saying yes, yes. Now, what we do next in this activity, unlike the other one, is we do not show the thing that we've labeled, but we remember it. And then we have a discussion where we share and we discuss. So we say, what does the word relate to in your case? Does it relate to you? Does it relate to a thing? Does it relate to an experience? So for example, I chose the word painful, not to refer to myself, not to refer to the yoga mat, but to refer to the experience of doing yoga. I chose the word creative. I labeled this. Now this is something I made the other day. So in this case, I'm using the word to refer modestly to myself. And the point is, as some of you were saying in the chat box, you know, you're labeling all kinds of things. You're having fun with it. Some of you are labeling your husband. Some are labeling your cat. Some are choosing books, candles. So the point here is that the linguistic content is generated after the labeling. And by getting the students to remember the words they labeled, this is just part of developing their language knowledge. Instead of always reading, always checking their notes, they have to think, wait, what was the word? What did I stick it to? And that connection that they're making is what's going to help their memory. So they can give a little bit more detail. You know, why did they choose this thing for this word? How similar are their choices to their partners? And you can use this for all different kinds of things. So you can use this for, these are just examples. Grammar, like superlative adjectives. So I could get you to label things like small, and then say smaller, and then say smallest. And your students are going, oh gosh, I already labeled something really small. What's smaller than that? You know, so there's a much more, there's a much deeper engagement there with the real meaning of the word. It's not just using language because, you know, they can see a reason for it. Similarly, physical attributes. So particularly with younger learners or at lower levels, keeping things very simple, very concrete. So you could say, find something yellow, find something round, find something soft, etc. The example that we've just done now is about making emotional associations with the meaning of different words. And you could also make it more personal. So you could say, you know, label something that reminds you of this other student, and then they discuss why. And again, that all helps with the rapport generation. So it doesn't feel so isolating studying remotely. So I might stick the name Yoshiko to a journal because I remember that she told me one lesson that she writes in a journal every day, and so on. So there's lots of different things you can do with this. The point is that it's active because it requires the students to get out of their chair and do something in the physical environment. And it's interactive because of the conversation that it generates afterwards. Now, I drew your attention to the name of this activity, and I want to do it again. It's not just labeling, it's also remembering. So there's some interesting psychology research that shows that we're more likely to remember things in future if we actively try to remember them when we're asked or when we're tested. So trying to remember what you wrote earlier or why you chose something is a really good way to strengthen your long-term memory. And of course, if you have students who are really motivated and really engaged, they're going to love having a room full of labels of words that they want to remember. It's their own little vocabulary bubble. All right, let's do another activity. The example that I'm going to demonstrate here is for younger learners, but it can actually be used for older learners too. So after we do this one, I'll show you another example and you can see how you can adapt it. In this specific example, the pupils listen to a recording or watch a video, and when they hear a certain word, they must quickly stand up and sit down. So they do a little jump like this, up, down. Now, you could ask learners to listen for all of the words that you give them here, or you could give different pupils responsibility for a different word. And that's quite effective because it means that even the other pupils who maybe during one activity don't have responsibility for a word, they're still going to love policing the activity and paying attention. You know, no, they stood up and it wasn't the word or whatever. I usually also include one word which is not in the audio because this provides a little more challenge for the stronger students. And you can do this either with spoken audio or with songs at all levels, all ages. So again, I'll show you an example now. This is for primary age learners, and this uses a story song from the Bebop course. First, I'll show you the 4 words that you have to listen for, and I need you to write these down because when I play the video, my slide will disappear. So please make a note of these 4 words. And when you hear one of these words in the songs, you know what to do. You do this. Whoop, whoop. So up and down, stand up, sit down. So for example, the song is playing, you hear the word today, and you think, whoop, today. Okay. So please make a note of the words. I will also type them in the chat box now quickly. Now I'm going to open the video, so my slide will disappear, but the video will start. You know what to do. Please move your chair back if you're sitting at a desk, so when you stand up, you don't hit the desk. I don't want you to hurt yourselves doing this activity. Okay, so here are the words. Now let's get the video ready. Okay, I'm opening the video. Remember, there is one word that you will not hear. And here we go.
On the farm, it's a special day. The hens are happy, they'll have chicks today. On the farm, it's a special day. The hens are happy, they'll have chicks today. The rooster goes cock-a-doodle-doo. The cow goes moo, moo, moo. Chirp goes the chick, then cluck goes the hen. Moo, moo goes the cow again. Oh!
Whew. Okay, so if for any reason you had difficulty with the sounds there, I hope you understand the concept that if you play an audio or a video to your students while they're listening, they're standing up and down as they hear those words. And maybe some of you noticed that even I missed a couple and I prepared this, listened to it 100 times and should have been expecting it. So really, you have to really focus and engage. Let me just close this and open my slides again. And I'll just skip forward to where we left off. Give me a moment. Whew, I'm a little bit warm now from all this jumping around, playing songs. Now, as I said, this is a young learner's example, but it's not restricted to young learners. Here we go. There we go. So hopefully I can see some of you were commenting in the chat box that the word that you didn't hear was now. Now, the way that I designed this is I've included one word that was predictable from the rhyming. So there was a word early in the song which has the same sound as again. Now, if you're teaching children, they love the confident feeling that they get when they think, I know, it must be again because they just said hen and that sounds the same. But I also included a distractor word, which sounds very similar to the word in the song. The word in the song was cow. My distractor word was now. So again, even if your pupils think they know all the words, this helps keep them focused. And of course, with young learners, you could play this song a million times and they will know all the words, but I've never seen a child yet who says, no, I've heard it before, I don't want to play again. They love the repetition, they love the routine, they love the familiarity. And this keeps it a little bit more physical and engaging. But as I said, it's not just for younger learners, it's also a good way to practice listening for specific details, because adding physical movement can often make this kind of exercise feel more like listening than just hearing. Because by adding physical movement, some learners, and I know I'm one of these learners, may feel that their attention is more focused. Now, the next example, I'm not going to play for you, but I'll just show you how it works. So if you're not teaching primary learners, you're teaching older learners, maybe teens or adults, and you have a listening. You could do something like this. After you've listened or watched something for gist, for general understanding, you give them a number of words. These words come from a life skills video from the Gateway course. And again, I give them just a few words. This is for about 1 minute of a recording, and I've included a word that is not there, so it focuses their attention a little bit more. Then we play the recording. They've already seen it, so they already have some familiarity with the speakers' voices. It's not completely new. And after they've done that activity, we look at the task. Here I've written the exam task because a lot of exams require learners to hear specific words and to put them in a sentence in a way that is grammatically accurate. So what I've done is I've taken the audio script, removed a few sentences. The words come from those sentences, so I've removed those words, and now the learners put them back in when they listen. And then they, after they've tried this, so here are the sentences. Again, we won't do this together. You understand the concept. But they put the words in the sentences, the 4 words which they heard, and then they watch the video again or listen to the audio again and check their answers. So I prepare a slide that has the answers as well. And again, this all comes from the tape script, which is in the course material. So there's not a lot of extra creation I have to do. I just have to choose things that are already in the course content. Now we're coming to the end of the webinar. So what I'd like us to do before we finish is just to reflect on how we felt about those activities and how we think our students would feel. Because the last tip that I'm going to give you is just to be careful with these kinds of activities. They're fun, you know, we get really enthusiastic, but that doesn't mean they'll work for everybody. It's always difficult to design activities that are equally useful and fun for everybody. And it's dangerous to make assumptions about people's physical fitness or their energy levels. So I'm not suggesting that we spend all of every lesson standing up and sitting down or running around, but these are just some ways to inject a little bit more of an active energy into some of your activities. And just like with anything else, I really recommend that you get learners' feedback on the new things that you try with them. So the last thing I'll do with you is to demonstrate what I mean by this. So I've prepared a little tool for you to give me some feedback on these activities. This is how you access the poll. Now I have this open on another screen here. So when you start choosing how likely you are to do these activities, they will start appearing in real time on my screen. As soon as I see them appearing, I will share my screen with you so you can also see them. So please just follow these instructions to find the feedback form. There's only 4 activities here. There's the find something which, miming and narrating, labeling and remembering, and then the stand up and sit down. And I'd like you to give each one a score on your computer or on your phone. And the scores go from 1 to 10. 1 is, no, I definitely won't use it. 10 is, yes, I can't wait to use it. And if you'd like to give some more information about this, you can type your comments in the chat box. I can see now that some of you are already entering your responses. So what I will do now is just share my screen with you so that you can see your own feedback appearing. So you should be able to see now the activity on my screen, and you can see that you're giving them quite high scores, which I'm really pleased with. I'm happy to see that so many of you feel you could use these activities. I'd be really interested to know if you cannot use these activities, why not? What do you think would be the problem in your context? Because of course, nothing works for everybody. There will always be some variety. So do type your ideas into the chat box. And now we're coming to the end of the webinar. You can also add any questions that you have in the chat box, and I'll try to answer them before we finish. I'm going to leave the survey open so you can keep putting your results, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and come back to the presentation so that I can show you my last few tips before you leave. So let me just come back to my slides and show you my very last few tips before we say goodbye. And you can also type questions in the chat box. My last tips for you are just a few things that I've learned from working online and teaching online that I think would be helpful to share, especially after the earlier webinar today when we had some technical problems and I realized I should share some of the things that we've done in this webinar to avoid these problems, and just other things in general. So one thing that I do is I always have a Post-it note stuck to my laptop to cover my webcam. Sometimes when things go wrong, everything freezes, and even if you want to switch off your webcam, you can't. So I like to have a little Post-it note that I can just do this. Boop, gone. Now I'm invisible. And because it's a Post-it note, it sticks to the back of my screen, so I don't have to find it every time. And then my last few tips are here. So always keep some water on your desk and keep it in a bottle with a lid. The last thing you need is to accidentally spill a drink on your keyboard. So always have water, always have it in a bottle. It's helpful to have an emergency task ready in advance, just in case you have any technical problems. And again, your students will get to know you if they haven't already, and they'll know that sometimes problems happen. If you want to play music in the background, like I did earlier, there's a good website called FreePD that has a lot of tracks which are copyright free. They can be used without worrying that you're going to have any legal problems. And one last thing I would suggest is if you have technical problems, as fast as you possibly can, mute your microphone. This keeps your stress private. I don't need to tell you all the language that was coming out of my mouth earlier when our webinar had some technical issues and I was going, how can I fix it? So if possible, mute things as fast as possible, cover your webcam as fast as possible, and then you're not dealing with the double stress of fixing the problem and trying to keep looking professional. So these are my very last tips. Thank you so much for giving up your time to stay with us today.